It is time to start second annual IMSA Hall of Fame brunch. Before we get going, IMSA President John Doonan, please come join us on stage. We'll also have the benefit of Mark Raffoff as well to help us with some insights throughout the event.
Adding my good morning and thanks for attending. Thank you, Marshall. What better person in our sport to MC this event? I think Marshall exemplifies knowledge of our sport's history and still covering the history that we're making today. We're proud, so proud to have now the second induction class to the IMSA Hall of Fame. The IMSA Hall of Fame, while virtual at imsahalloffame.com, is absolutely the place that we can tell stories and capture the history, the great history, 50-plus years of history of IMSA. And we capture this morning and these stories to make sure our next generation fan knows where we came from. I was always told as a young boy, never forget those who came before you. And many of the people up here are boyhood heroes, and this is one of those moments where they say sometimes don't meet your heroes, but in this case, I'm really glad that I have. This evening, the inductees will receive limited edition, specific, custom IMSA Hall of Fame medallions representing their contribution. That'll be presented at the WeatherTech Night of Champions. So congratulations, gentlemen. We're so thrilled, Mr. France, Mike Helton, Ed Bennett, and I, to be able to induct now our second class. And I remember vividly reading On Track magazine, Racer magazine, and Auto Week, and hearing all of the stories of the history they were making then. And I think it's safe to say that we're still creating tremendous history based on what was accomplished over the course of the weekend and last night. You can't make it up after 10 hours in the race or 54 hours, 64 hours of racing. It comes down to the last 15 minutes. So congratulations, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll let Marshall take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Last item before we get going, we have a number of folks here who make this possible, make everything possible. Quick thank you, IMSA CEO Ed Bennett, Mr. France, Chairman Mike Helton, so many of you, David Pettit, thank you so much. Start with Derek Bell, the stats. Tell a portion of the story. 19 overall career, IMSA victories, 3 Rolex 24 victories, 5 victories at Le Mans. Pure class, though. Someone who epitomized the peak of quality of driving and as a person who brought so much style and class to how he performed. Mark Raffoff shared a great, quick anecdote saying, over all the years, I never had to speak with him. There are many drivers Mark had to go and reprimand, not Mr. Bell. Love to think of you, Derek, as someone who, as I speak to next generation of drivers, the Franchitti brothers, so many British drivers and European drivers simply idolize this man. He was their blueprint, not only in sports cars, but also for all that you achieved here, Derek, to go with everything that you achieved in Europe. Derek showed to so many European drivers competing in Group C, you could come to America, have success as well. The quality of racing was just as strong, if not stronger, at times. Let's talk about coming to America, Derek. So, IMSA for sure, Lowenbrow livery, Holbert Racing, that comes to mind first for me, but being regaled about you coming here, Porsche 917, high banks of Daytona, dealing with oversteer, one of the bravest men in the world, simply for surviving that. What a wild way to come to America in sports cars.
Yeah, I mean, you look back and you go, well, all the stuff they tell about you isn't really true. But I guess the results do show that you had quite a good career and, you got on very well. But it does go back to the famous 917, to be honest. But even before that, I drove for Mr. Ferrari at Spa, and then I drove at my first Le Mans was for Ferrari in the 512S. And then the next year I came out to drive the 917 for Porsche. And it was absolutely an amazing car, quite terrifying. And my first race was with dear Joe Siffert, who's no longer with us, sadly. And he taught me a few things of driving around Argentina. I'm not going to go through every damn race because we'll be here for 4 days. So don't worry, I know how to cut up on the time. And we won the 1,000 Ks in Argentina, my very first race for Porsche. So that was a good start. Pedro Rodriguez drove the other car with Jackie Oliver. And unfortunately, Jackie stuffed it during practice. So they had to bring a new front end of a 917 out on the plane, which is kind of difficult because it was all well glued together, and he came like as really the front end of the cockpit. So that didn't go down well with Pedro. And so he naturally didn't win because we won. And that was the beginning, really, of my time with Porsche. And then we came here to Daytona, which is really what I wanted to mention. And I'd heard about Daytona, but actually never been here myself. And it is pretty terrifying. And the first time, I'd never driven on an oval either. And I remember sort of coming, and John Wire said, no need to turn up until mid-morning, Derek, oh boy. He said, Joe Sifford will do the early part of the driving in the practice. Just a free day for us alone. And I remember driving through that famous tunnel of the track and came up on the infield, and it was dead quiet. And I went, well, where's all the action? This is pretty quiet, not what I expected. And then suddenly I heard this, the flat 12 roar to life in the pit lane as I sort of stood out on the central part of the whole facility there on my own, just looking, not a soul anywhere. And then I saw, obviously, Joe drive around on his first lap. And then the second lap, he got up to speed. And it was amazing. I mean, we were doing, I don't know how fast down the back straight, but it was right up there as fast as you could go. It was with a short tail, so it wasn't the 240s we did a few weeks later at Le Mans. But in that car, it was damn quick. But I just remember, I remember listening as Joe went round turn 3 and 4. And as he went round there, he just didn't lift. And I went, oh my goodness, I've never been on an oval, and I've got to do that straight away. And John Wire's there clicking his watch like an old headmaster of a public school in England. And it was pretty terrifying, actually. And I remember just seeing Joe go down the back. And as he went round the banking, I kid you not, his front left wheel was below the line of the sort of seam in the concrete. Now, and the rear wheel was way up there high. And he went around sort of this incredible sort of crab-like motion, holding the car down to stop it sort of going up into the wall. And that was my first smell of it. And then I remember, I got in to drive it later in the day, thank goodness, when I got over it all. And I must admit, the car was very, very stable. But it was amazing. There's no chicane down the back. And we went all the way around. We came out onto turn 3, or turns 1 and 2, went into that flat all the way down the back. So we were doing, just over 200 miles an hour, I suppose, and then turning into the banking flat out and hoping you got round. And generally we did. And I must admit, I think it was about 40 years later before I ended up on my head coming around that banking. So I did have a good run without an accident there. It was my last time I went there when we were upside down in the Momo car, strangely enough. But that was Daytona, and that was unfair, really, to put me there the first time sort of in that car. It would have been nice in a 911. It would be about my mark, to be honest. But, of course, I raced there a lot. It was the most phenomenal place. And, we had quite a lot of success there.
Another aspect of Derek when it comes to IMSA, there's only a handful of folks we can say are truly a through line through seemingly almost every single era, drove just about everything from the pre-GTP era in 935s into the GTP era. Absolute brilliant tandem, and also the other endurance teammates with the late, great Al Holbert as well, who was inducted last year, first year inductee. Also wonderful to think, Derek, that the Holbert Racing HR1 Porsche 962 chassis that you had so much success with got to drive 30 years later at a HSR event. Tell us about that, being reconnected with a vehicle that was such a great part of your success.
I'd just say one thing first, that my first time actually in racing in IMSA was with Bob Akin. And I know he's been inducted, if not before, certainly I've seen him receive awards. And he was wonderful to bring me out and drive a 930, a 934, well actually a 935. And it was an amazing experience to drive with Bob I wish I could remember the third driver's name, but we came second, I think, 2 years in a row. So I did learn a little bit of driving around Daytona in a car that was half stable. So that was fantastic. So, you know, later on it became an easy thing to do, to do these long distance races. And what was the second part? I'm sorry. Or the first part, really.
Reconnecting with HR1.
Oh, yeah, with
HSR
HR1.
event.
And of course, you know, it was thanks to Al Holwood who gave me all this success, you know, with that car. And Al, actually, I met him. He drove with me in the 924 Carrera GTS and those from Porsche, or the GTR, actually. And we both drove them at Le Mans. And if you remember, Peter, God, who was it? Who was it? Peter, pardon? No, the other driver who was in the car. Peter Craig. He had an accident on the road and hit a farm truck. So we had three drivers in the British car in the race, a German car and an American car. So they took me out of the Brit car and put me in with Al Holwood, who I'd never met before. And it was just wonderful to get to know. He was quite difficult to get to know. He wasn't an easy man to get to know, but he wasn't rude about anybody. He just grunted if he wasn't happy. And that was how it was. But it was fantastic working with him. So we drove together to 924. And I think it was like 8 or 9 in the morning. We were lying in 8th place in this little car, which, you know, had 250 horsepower or 320 horsepower something. And it really wasn't quick, but it rained all night. And of course, when it rains, you don't use as much fuel. And we were doing like 3.5 hours on a tank full of gas. So, of course, all the other guys are roaring in to top up with fuel. And we were still flying around out there, round and round and around, droning around. And of course, you know, we had about 4 less pit stops than anybody else. So that was very fortunate. But that was how I started with Al. And, you know, that sort of over the years, that progressed with the various wonderful cars that he asked me to drive with Chip Robinson and obviously Al Unser Jr. and others. It was just a phenomenal time to work with him and just really have the best car in the series apart from his damn car, which the Nissan did a little better than we did. But we got better when he retired, which is strange how that happens. Yeah. And we won a few more races then. But HR1 was special, and the team was enthusiastic. Al was one of the most sort of underrated drivers and underrated engineers. I think you only read about how wonderful he was as time goes by. And, of course, I know his son very well. I had hoped he might be here, but he's probably too busy being an engineer down there in Mooresville. But nonetheless, Al was great to work with. And as you know, at the end of the time with Al and HR1, we actually, in our last 2 years, he and I won Daytona and Le Mans, and then we won 8 Daytona and Le Mans the next year as well, which was nobody's ever won the 2 races 2 years in a row. In Europe, we were helped by Hans Stuck, and over here, we were helped by Al Unser Jr. in one particular case. I can't remember the other. But it was a wonderful car to drive, and of course, I drove it back in 2019 when this lunatic wanted the car to be driven by me and my son Justin, and of course with Gunnar Jeanette. And I believe we won the 6 hours we were in, but there wasn't much else to beat really. But it was still wonderful to get out there and do 200 miles an hour again after all those years that we hadn't driven the car. And it was like, and you know, thanks to, I think there's a guy called, where are you? You're over back there. You see this chap here. He is the star that built those engines, and we were very, very lucky to have a lot of success. And Alvin, it was a major, major part of that. But it was a lovely, you know, experience to go back and drive the car that you had been successful in all those years before, and it ran like clockwork. And as I say, we did quite well.
Drove his final race with your son and some other gents in Der Haag Motorsports. 2000s, early 2000s, what an amazing career spanning every possible category, but absolutely centerpiece in IMSA's history in formative years. Please welcome Derek Bell into the IMSA Hall of Fame. Now it's time to talk technical items. One of my all-time favorite cars, apologize, it's P2 to the All-American Racers, Eagle, Geoff, but this Nissan GTP, the ZX-Turbo, the first generation, there's a second generation of the Nissan that certainly will be considered for Hall of Fame induction. This car appeared for the first time under the Electromotive banner, all black California Cooler sponsorship at Riverside in 1985, a Lola-designed car. It is a debut that our friend Mark Raffoff will never forget because its trillion horsepower engine exploded and a piece of the turbo housing hit him in the head. So, might have been trying to tell you something there, Mark, but showed immense potential in its formative years. 1988, Trevor Harris, one of the great designers, took learnings from that Lola, added a lot of thoughts of his own to it. An immense team of engineers, electronic wizards, Don Devendorf, founder of Electromotive, Wes Moss involved there, so many folks where you look at engineers, big brains, passionate folks with sports car racing, spent a few years learning in GTP, said, we are going to level up another Southern California powerhouse team. And in 1988, they did one other thing that changed IMSA's history, its trajectory, put Goodyears on that car. And it went from being fast but fragile or plagued with speed issues at certain times when its previous tire supplier fell short, adding a Electromotive designed Nissan with those Goodyears, 8 wins in a row. As a younger and thinner IMSA fan, I can tell you the nation of racing fans was captivated by the streak. That is what it was called. Week in and week out. Would it continue? How far would it go? Sometimes today, maybe in some other forms of racing where there's been a dominant manufacturer, you see fans tuning out, not as engaged. It's almost predetermined they're going to win the race. Why bother to tune in? That did not happen in 1988 with this gentleman and his co-drivers. That streak had all of us on the edge of our seats. How far would it go? 8 in a row. Not very sharing there, Brabham. You could have let some other people do some winning. Really did start that dynasty, though. 4 championships in a row. This car, which ran through about the middle of 1990 before it was replaced, responsible for the first 2.5 of those championships of the 4 in a row. Did other things, too. Full crew rides. That was a tradition that they really built out. For safety's sake, I don't know if we would encourage that today, but when they won, came to pit lane, parked, the entire crew climbed onto the car. They went for a victory lap. Another beautiful visual. No, Mr. Doonan says no. I'll keep lobbying. I'm going to keep pushing on that. Another aspect of this vehicle had a nickname, and it became famous. How many race cars have a truly famous, long-standing nickname? What did he drive to all of those victories? Elvis. It was nicknamed Elvis, another great aspect of this car. Also became a customer car, too, and had some success with Jim Busby's team. So thinking about IMSA becoming extremely popular in the 1980s and having this Nissan brand become the centerpiece of its marquee class, this big streak happening, this lovely gentleman and his co-drivers doing wonderful work. This was the car when so many folks thought of IMSA in the mid to late 1980s, even in the early 90s. It was this Nissan, blue, beautiful blue, red, white, and blue, and Geoff Brabham. What comes to mind for you, Mr. Raffoff, seeing this car run roughshod over so many others?
Well, 2 things. One, it was a team effort. My recollection is those 8 wins, I don't believe for those 8 races the crew ever did a pit stop longer than about 22 seconds. 32 gallons of gas, occasionally driver changes, 4 tires, 22 seconds.
They did like the fuel tank, though, and they wanted to take it for a ride.
Yeah, they finally pulled the tank over in Portland, I think. It was somewhere like that, Geoff, wasn't it? You left and you were... Yeah. Was it here? Yeah, I just remember that. The other thing, back to the 8 wins, was back, those of us who remember the newspaper, USA Today. Every time they won, you'd open up that sports section. There was a 2-page spread of that car in your face for the entire United States. It was fabulous. But
Great credit to Nissan as
Nissan
well,
did a
from a marketing
fantastic job
standpoint.
of marketing their motorsports in IMSA, not just here. I mean, the publications they created in Japan. The Japanese finally came, and you guys raced their cars, the C cars in the early 90s. But the era was special because the 8 wins weren't with without serious competition. It was probably the most competitive GTP years, 88 and 89, 90 and 91. And I think in 91, every brand in the series won races, and there were 5 or 6 at the top. But it was just special the way they executed what they did, both drivers and team. The whole group was fantastic. I think Kaz probably had a lot to do with it. He was a taskmaster. I remember for years, a couple of years of, trials and tribulations with it. He told me, I'd go back to the shop and tell him, okay, what broke, fix it. We're going back, and you drove it as hard as you could all the time. There was never a moment where that car was not being flogged to the point where something broke, and then they fixed it, and then one day it didn't break. And after that, it was, see you later, everybody.
The great Kaz Kastner. Geoff, can you share with folks what it was like going from great potential through 87 to that key being turned to where seemingly if anyone ever wanted to find you, just go to Victory Lane. That's where he'll be.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. When I first got involved with the program, the week before, I'd actually was watching TV and I saw Don Devendorf hit the wall at Pocono, I think it was. And then the next shot was him on his hands and knees in the middle of the track, gasping for breath. So when he hit the wall, all the seat belts broke. And he just stepped out of the car and he was, really winded, really bad. He couldn't drive in the next race. So lo and behold, the telephone rings. Trevor Harris rings up and says, Don can't drive at Riverside. Would you like to join the team? And I kind of said, no, not really.
How are the seatbelts doing?
Yeah, so I made up the excuse because I was running IndyCar at the same time, and I made up the excuse that I got a test, with the IndyCar I can't come out, So anyway, I thought, phew, I managed to miss that bullet, So, but anyway, he rang up again, and they were persistent, and so I said, okay, I'll come out and to California, and I'll have a look, and. When I got there, I was immediately impressed by, the direction and the people, because yes, they knew they had problems, but they also, to me, seemed like they had solutions. Yes, it might take a little bit of a time, but they knew exactly, where they were going. So anyway, the first time I drove the car was at Riverside, and the throttle lag was so bad. Like you go through the corner, and halfway through the corner, you'd give it full throttle, and there's just nothing. And then as you come off the corner, as the power came, you actually had to come off the throttle as it was accelerating. And then as soon as it got straight, you could go back on the throttle. And Riverside, we're using the long course there. So anyway, I qualified, and as I come into the pits, and all the team are clapping and jumping up and down, I thought, oh, great, I'm on pole, And but I wasn't. I was second, and I was thinking, well, why are you jumping up and down? We're not on pole. Okay, we did okay. We were second. But anyway, the race started, and we were doing okay. And then the car started to feel really funny, and I wasn't. The fact that I hadn't driven it before, I wasn't sure if it was the tires or whatever. And anyway, what was happening was the steering rod. Had started to come, arm started to come loose and was winding itself out. And I got down the back straight into the kink, which was over 200 mile an hour, and it came off and only had one wheel steering. Luckily for me, it was the outside wheel that I still had steering as I went through the kink, and I only just made it through the kink at 200 mile an hour. But I ended up hitting the wall in turn 9 because I was trying to get it stopped. And I was thinking, yeah, there was a reason why I didn't want to drive this car. And actually, I caused the yellow when Lynn St. James and a few other people had that big accident.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of my fault. So anyway, the next time I drove the car was, we did a test at Portland. They had the new bodywork on it, and just driving out of the pits, I knew it was better. It was just major upgrade on the car before. And then talking about the 88 season, I really have to, it's probably before that. But anyway, I have to thank IMSA really for making the car competitive, because they limited they restricted our boost, all right, and it cut the power down, but it just pushed the torque way up and also got rid of all the throttle lag. We had no throttle lag whatsoever, and we were way faster. So that was...
Did we just have the first driver in history thank IMSA for a balance of performance change? We need to document this moment.
I was going to say, we're still restricting boost.
Oh,
Yeah, so, and it just transformed the car, and it came reliable, it came easy to drive, and the win streak was tough because the guys, instead of checking the car twice, checking everything twice the night before, they were checking everything 3 times. Then it became 4 times, And then the night before the race, we were changing engines, gearboxes, brakes. Would do the race, go to the next race, do practice qualifying, and then night before the race, new engine, new gearbox, it was just, it was wearing everyone out. It was almost a relief when it ended.
wow. The Nissan GTP ZX-Turbo, 1985 to 1990, among the winningest cars in IMSA history, brought this gentleman in the world of sports cars to the absolute top. Also, Chip Robinson, Derek Daly, Ari Lyondike, Bob Earl, John Morton, you already mentioned Mr. Devendorf, Elliott Forbes, Robinson, Nissan. What a true gift you gave us. Thank you. Welcome to the Hall of Fame. We are going to stay with Mr. Brabham here, son of legendary Formula One driver Jack Brabham, of course. We've spoken about the 4 consecutive championships from 1988 to 1991, 25 career IMSA wins, which it felt like 250 at the time. But all the success that he had, Le Mans as well, adding a victory there overall in 1993. I think of you, Geoff, getting to Nissan in particular as the connector. They had all of the ingredients. They had all of the talent. They needed someone in the center to pull everyone a little closer, push more in certain directions. Absolute kindest person you could ever meet. Also behind the scenes, someone who did not accept anything less than the highest level of quality. Iceman persona on the outside, but also a big motivator on the inside. I also think of you, Geoff, as one of IMSA's great race day performers. You might not have been on the pole at whatever race, but if that blue Nissan was in somebody's rearview mirror, they were panicking because they knew you would likely be going by at one point in time. Also, took the baton as the face of IMSA. In its early days, we had the great Peter Gregg, Hurley Haywood, Al Holbert. Geoff took that as IMSA really started to reach its peak in terms of public awareness. Friend E.C. Mueller, former PR man for the team at Electromotive, couldn't be here, but wanted to send along some thoughts about our man, Mr. Brabham. Said what many don't realize was some of Geoff's best efforts were during the tougher times, pre-1988, when the Electromotive Nissan was very good. He said Geoff always had faith in the car, that it would get better. He recognized the technical talent of Don Devendorf, the managing talent of Cass Kastner, and the passion and determination of the crew. He said it took bravery from Geoff. The car was a handful, but he kept faith. It would come together. He said a glimpse of the possible was that dominant run at Portland in 1986, but a first win was lost in the last lap when the car was short of fuel. He said then, sweet victory with an inaugural win at Miami in 1987 included a thrilling single-car qualifying shootout. Saw Geoff win pole over Michael Andretti in a March Buick. He said, but that was followed by an entire season of disappointment, fighting with many gremlins and tire challenges. Geoff never wavered, though, nor Elliott Forbes Robinson, his co-driver. Then 1988 came along. The next few years saw legendary performances, multiple driver and manufacturer championships in the first golden era of IMSA. Geoff is an amazing champion driver, quiet out of the car, but always done his talking on the track. Mr. Brabham, tell us about today. Tell us about being recognized for all that you've given us, all the memories you've created, all the things that you did in a respectful manner to help elevate IMSA.
Yeah, I don't know. I think as a race driver, particularly if you're one that doesn't have major backing, you're not always in control of your own destiny. And then if you have a long career, you just kind of hope that you just fall in the right place at the right time with the right team. And that's basically, through my career, I had, lots of ups and downs, but I was always a little bit frustrated because I never really felt like I ever got with the right team at the right time. But that changed with Nissan, and I just felt like I was just fortunate that I fell into that team at the right time. That was more than anything else. And then obviously, you always try and do the best you can. It doesn't matter what you drive. And we, as you said before, we started off slowly. It was difficult. We had quite a few failures. One race we had the chassis split in half, the front bulkheads split in half at one track, and we had a lot of tire issues. Actually, I felt, you mentioned EFR, I felt really bad for him. Actually, it was at Riverside again, and I was still doing IndyCar, but I used to come in and do the odd race every now and again, but I kind of qualify, I would start the race. And at Riverside, I kind of felt sorry for EFR, and I said, "Hey, you start the race. You deserve that." So EFR started the race, and 10 laps in, the tire blew. He hit the wall and broke his collarbone. So I kind of dodged a bit of a bullet on that one there. But we could see the people involved: Don, Trevor, Kaz, who became a great friend of mine. They knew, and Ashley Page and a few of the other people who were really involved in that. They just kept chipping away, and then when we got to 1988, we changed to Goodyears. The rule change for IMSA gave us. It just all came together, and we just got on this roll. It was surreal, really. It just because Jaguar had come over. They thought they were going to just win easy, and then the rivalry that we had with Jaguar just made it so much better. It was just so much fun. It was intense. Some races we'd have an advantage. Some races they were really close or had a slight advantage, but somehow we always just managed to come out on top. And it was. I'll never forget that year. I just look back on it as I was just in the right place at the right time.
Has an amazing son, Matty Brabham, who is continuing his tradition. You Brabhams like to win motor races, so the streak is continuing here. Friends, please help me to honor Geoff Brabham, inducted into IMSA Hall of Fame. Keep going with our titans of IMSA. Jim Downing dominated IMSA GTU production cars, moved into the GTP lights category, widely credited as one of the main inspirations of GTP lights. Here today we would look and say LMP2, LMP3. This is the continuation of what he helped to push forward within the series. 24 career IMSA victories, starting out long time ago, Mazda's RX-3s in the radial sedan series, just as Geoff so heavily associated with Nissan throughout his career. Jim Downing and Mazda, you say one, it equals the other. Thinking that all that he did to make Mazda, along with many others, truly bedrock portion of IMSA's history across so many classes. France family, always an advocate that IMSA should be a place where manufacturers can come and thrive, but also your next door neighbor who loves to race should be able to find a car, achieve that dream, go and have success. So much of what Mr. Downing has done through his team, through his shop here locally, helped to facilitate that, make sure that any person could come and compete in a Mazda, as so many did. Also, how often does a person have not only that as the person most associated with one brand in the sport, but also have a second pillar, driver safety, How many race car drivers are alive today because of the Hans device he helped to invent with Bob Hubbard? Loved seeing back in the day that massive original white contraption. Mark Raffoff always loves remembering that. We still, Jim, don't know how you fit into the car with that on, but it was a crown, that is for sure. But you think of the Mazda RX-7 in IMSA, we think so much of Mr. Downing. This Atlanta-based team as well, greater area here, the Kudzu brand, became a true dedicated manufacturer within IMSA, winning 1994, the first season post-GTP, the World Sports Car Formula with Wayne Taylor, despite having Ferrari 333 SPs inducted last year to compete against Spices and many other great cars. Mazda RX-7 GTOs, four-rotor engines in the RX-7 92P GTP cars. Go on for so long here, Mr. Downing. Tell us about IMSA and what you found as a place to make your name, also make great business, and also seed countless decades of folks enjoying Mazda-related products.
A far less spectacular program than we've just heard. Highlight of my career getting started was when I called John Bishop in 1973 because I'd heard something about this IMSA group, and I'd been racing SCCA Mustangs and Elvas and British cars that blew up on a regular basis in club racing. And so I called John, or IMSA, I didn't know who I was talking to. John Bishop picked up the phone, and we talked a little bit, and I said, I was wondering what do I do to get in with you, and what are the highlights? And he said, well, the highlights are that you'll probably get your entry fee back after a race. And to a club racer, that $60 was a big deal. And I said, well, all right, I'm in. And I happen to know of Pete Harrison, who was a famous sports car racer, an IMSA racer, who had gotten upset with IMSA the year before because the Mazda RX-2 had done so well that he added 400 pounds of weight to this little sedan, and so Pete was going to sell his car. I bought the car, and that's how I got started. And gradually, the rules got fairer and fairer, and it worked out. And like all of us have driven, we had high spots and low spots. I realized at one point that the Argo that I'd commissioned to be built in England for the GTP series in '94, when Mazda thought, well, the early GTP cars were not very reliable. The Lotus 600, I think, they would break on a regular basis, just didn't finish races. We thought, well, we were pretty reliable. The rotary engine was very reliable if you played by the rules, and not legal rules. We're talking about engine build rules. And so I had that car designed and built with Mazda money. And turns out by the time we were finished, everybody had gotten reliable, so we weren't going to win one of the big races. And fortunately, John, after some discussions, decided to have a Camel Light series, which was named, oddly enough, by my crew chief, who happened to smoke, and came up with the idea of lights, and we communicated that to John, and boom, he made the class, and that's worked out for us, and I started building my own cars at that point because I learned a lot about the Argo that we bought in England, and so highlights. We had one. Our sort of big one was much later, after some success here and there, and we managed to have the '96 season where my kudzu 3-rotor 450 horsepower car came 3rd overall in Daytona and Sebring, and we went to Le Mans and won the LMP2 class there, and so that was a thrill of a lifetime. Other than that, we've just sort of faded away and gotten old, and
That is by no means true. Anybody with any Wankel-powered motor racing vehicle is calling this gentleman's shop on a regular basis, a lifeline for so many. Another thing that impressed me so much is kudzu, line of kudzus continued through. Wasn't just IMSA, although the majority of the brand's competition was in IMSA, extended into the early years of Grand Am as well. I have a friend who owns a few of them, absolutely loves bringing them out at historic motor racing events. Jim Downing, inducted as a driver, constructor, contributor, pioneer in safety. Think of Mazda, we think of Jim. Everybody, please give Jim Downing a round of applause for his induction into the IMSA Hall of Fame. Before we got to GTP, we had almost became the Porsche 935 class. Possibly the most hot-rodded vehicle in IMSA history, as Mark Raffoff likes to say. You could take, from the very first Porsche 935 to the last, you could put 15 of them on a grid. There would be no two that are alike. Bodywork, some of the wildest, most inspiring vehicles I can think of in America, also Europe and throughout the world. The 935 was a test bed for human creativity, all anchored by a variety of motors that would go and go and go. Told a story by one Porsche 935 crew chief at Daytona thinking, well, everybody's really fast now. We're getting towards the end of the era. GTP formula was just starting to come up. What could we do to add an edge? Gunpowder. Started putting gunpowder in the fuel tank. And you knew that car because the flames coming out of the exhaust were green. So it wasn't just backfiring. The only thing it was missing was buckshot. But a wild era where seemingly no idea was out of bounds. One of the folks who made sure those boundaries were pushed, our dear friend Alvin Springer, representing the 935 as Andile Company, a massive instigator of the creativity through the Porsche 935 era. Alvin, what comes to mind? We speak to you so regularly about so many different models of Porsche 962s last year here at this event. Year on year, we're honoring another Porsche that truly made IMSA so much of what it was. What comes to mind about this vehicle you're so heavily tied to?
I'll tell you, the 935 was a race car for people. You know, you didn't have to be a super race car driver. You could be a normal guy and had a good time. The car by itself came from Germany over here, and it was already a very, very nice base. The only thing what we did as Andile at Porsche, we adapted the car to the American circuits, and I said the same thing about the 962 last year. And that was really the turning point, because we increased the torque and we took the horsepower away to a certain degrees. And again, you know, we left the modification of the cars. We never got involved. We just concentrated on engines. And I believe that the car by itself set a ground for us, for Porsche in the 70s here in the United States, the base for Porsche Motorsport.
Peter Gregg, Hurley Haywood, so heavily associated, but seemingly, if you look through an entry list, mid to late 70s, very early 80s, every IMSA driver that we knew and loved, and some of those getting their start, some of the gentlewomen drivers coming in. This was an all-purpose vehicle, fearsome, fearsomely fast. won the Rolex 24 6 times. And if that wasn't enough, let's win 12 hours of Sebring as well. True dominance there. Mark Raffoff was sharing a wonderful story. Most successful Porsche 935 chassis was chassis number 30. Bob Garrettson, San Francisco Bay Area entrant, owned it for the majority of its iterations. It was the famous Paul Newman Hawaiian Tropic car that went to Le Mans, had great success. It became the Apple-sponsored car after that, became the Style Auto-sponsored car that won at Daytona. Hertz livery, won endurance championships with John Paul Jr., was then sold to Wayne Baker, who won Sebring with it in 1983. 934 spec, I believe it was changed to, a bit of an orange school bus livery. It arrived at San Francisco Airport as a bare shell from Germany, went to his shop in Mountain View in Silicon Valley, and that's where its life sprang forth. But you think of this single 935 chassis that came as new, normal, and became this extreme thing by the end, taken out of the Yost Racing Museum, 1984, taken to Sebring. Stefan Johansson, Hans Heyer, De Narvaez is one of the drivers as well. It was the last major Porsche 935 victory, 1985 actually. So 1978 through 1985, how often does any single chassis make that kind of an impact in any motor racing series? That's also the car that Stefan Johansson loves to tell is his planes, trains, and automobiles experience. Had a wild time getting to Sebring that year, missed a lot of flights, got in. He showed up after the race had started, never seen Sebring, had never driven the car, and instead of doing what you think you might do, trying to get him in while there was a smidge of sunlight, oh no, Steph, go learn Sebring in a fire-breathing Porsche 935 at night. They won the thing. I don't understand how that happened. Nonetheless, the Porsche 935, great car as well for shops to close on it. Wasn't just something to purchase from Porsche. There came a point in time where shops started making their own. You can think of so many that look so wild. Some of them built here regionally in Georgia as well. But you think about what this car did to help power IMSA, make so many victories, but also took so many racing businesses and gave them an opportunity to grow themselves and go on to much bigger things. This perfect utility tool, the Porsche 935. Welcome to the IMSA Hall of Fame. Gianpiero Moretti, the perfect representation of a gentleman racer from a business standpoint with his Momo company, from a driving standpoint, personality as well. Cooked, made pasta for people. The person who owned the big company and the team and drove, brought that Italian touch of treating everyone within IMSA like members of his family, and as such, he became just an amazing part of our family, a winner in everything that he did. Also beat the biggest teams, another hallmark of what you can do in IMSA if you have talent and a will. Started in 1979, raced through 1998, a 20-year span that he was able to achieve so much. We think of a Bob Aiken as well as someone similar model, where so much success over so many years and propelled so many drivers forward. Matt, what comes to mind, having been there central to it all, knowing that Mr. Moretti was really and truly, he was us?
The one word that comes to mind when you think of Mr. Moretti is gentleman. No one else epitomized that title, in my opinion, like him. You know, he was so kind, not just to everyone he touched at the track, whether it was pasta dinners or anything like that. Here's a man that sent his 2 children to live with me for 3 months because he wanted them to experience what it was like to live in the States and be that kind human being. So he went out of his way to do so many things behind the scenes that no one ever realized what he did do. You know, and first and foremost, the other thing I want to add real quick is I talked to Matteo Moretti right before I got here about 30 minutes ago, and he wanted to express his apologies that he couldn't be here in person to join me. but he wanted to thank the France family, John Doonan, and everybody at IMSA for this amazing honor. This means everything to him, and sadly, both him and I wish that he was here accepting this and not myself.
Well, we're so happy to have you, Matt, and so thankful, the late Mr. Moretti. So we think of him, did a painting of him, 1993 at Phoenix. All the cars that he had driven, and by that time, he'd done 150 IMSA races, which was a record at that point. Just to understand how much he loved IMSA, you could not get him away from the racetrack, which is everything that you would hope. But to think about what he achieved, 56 victories, team 69 pole positions, three-time winner at Sebring, winner at the Rolex 24 in 1998, 10 overall victories. Think about the success of his Momo company, heralded everywhere from rap songs to the safety equipment, whether it's fire suits, seat belts, steering wheels, shift knobs. Truly took that model of let's go race in IMSA. We love racing, let's compete and let's win. But there's also a business aspect to this. And my brand aligns with where I race. And I can infuse the series that I'm in, but the racing in general, the racing world, with the ability to connect with what we sell. Who doesn't love the look of those red and yellow Momo-sponsored cars? Used his passion for the sport as a vehicle for business success. One of many to do it, but one of very few to do it as well as Mr. Moretti himself. Last year we mentioned one of the inductees, the Ferrari 333 SP. That was a Gianpiero Moretti-inspired decision. Matt, can you speak about that a little bit? Because to be able to call Piero Ferrari, hi, could you please make a race car that I would like to use? Who does that, and who gets a yes? Gianpiero Moretti.
He knew it was going to be his last ride. I think that he really wanted this one to be what he had inspired it to be. And clearly it went on to bigger and better heights. And in '98, he got the most expensive Rolex in the series history. So, but with that said, I mean, that was his crowning jewel achievement here, you know. So.
Gianpiero Moretti brought passion, brought love, brought style to IMSA. Wish he could be here, but nonetheless, Matt, thank you for joining us. Gianpiero Moretti, welcome to the IMSA Hall of Fame. We do not have the famed Cat in the Hat with us here. Unfortunately, was unable to make it, Jack Roush, but we do have good old not my brother, Scott Pruitt, to help. You done won a few motor races in Roush Mustangs. The Roush Mustang itself being inducted this year, and I do love the connectivity of this class, knowing that a certain Mr. Riley, that brilliant mind of yours, that large easel, pencils, drawing the design that would become the Roush Mustang, dominated IMSA's GTO class. IMSA popular terms of vehicles, GTU, smaller displacement, GTO, large bore. The GTP Lights class and GTP got so big to where having a single race with all the cars and all the classes was not possible. And so GTO and GTU was often broken off into a race of its own. And boy, those Roush Mustangs were responsible for an awful lot of victories. Think of all the drivers who competed in the cars. In IMSA, also Trans Am, whether it's Scott Pruitt, Tommy Kendall, Mark Martin, Dorsey Schrader, Lynn St. James, Paul Newman, endless amount. Our friend Calvin Fish, who's here. This was a vehicle that made so many drivers famous, champions, great, added to careers that were already exceptional or propelled them to further heights. Mark Raffos was telling me a story about them showing up with the Roush Mustang for its very first race, the end of the year, the Daytona 3-hour, and he had to have a little talk with Mr. Roush. Mark, you want to share that story?
So Jack had been running Mercury Capris in the Trans Am. So we had dialogued a lot on the phone, and Ford had given him the directive, you're going to represent the Ford brand with the Mustang and IMSA. Oh, great. So we talked about the stuff that had to change between the two. So we show up. He shows up at Daytona, and they're unloading the car, and kind of looked at it and realized the front of it was a Mustang, the back of it was a Capri. And I said, Jack. And he goes, well, I didn't get enough time to do the back part. And I go, well, yeah, but the Trans Am spoiler's about 3 inches taller than our spoiler, so you need to cut that off. But it was quite comical. He was always easy to work with, but always had a couple tricks up his sleeve. So the cat in the hat guy, that he was him. He's a good man, still is. But that was the funniest story. The other thing I have to say is, which maybe you will say, Marshall, but the man won the 24 Hours of Daytona 9 years in a row, took a year off so somebody else could win, and then came back and won it again, and then gave Paul Newman a win later that was, I think he's the oldest guy to ever win the 24 Hours of Daytona in a Roush Mustang. So amazing stuff. Car's amazing.
Thinking about what Jack did with that Mustang, that template, all built off of Mr. Riley's design, could take that chassis, attach seemingly any type of bodywork to it, and it evolved over the years, whether it was a Mustang, a Merkur XR4TI. For those of you who are younger, Google it. It was a thing a long time ago that didn't last very long. But Mercury, for sure, with what they did with the Capri body, this was a car that dominated wherever it went. Different motors in it was another huge aspect of what made this Roush Mustang successful. Could have a larger displacement V8, smaller based on the track they went to, then went to turbos. Jack told me a great story being on the dyno with one of the early 4-cylinder turbo motors that would be going into the GTO car, and it making far more torque than he expected. I said, how did that surprise you? He said, well, we got the thing spun up and it snapped the crankshaft, and the clutch and everything went flying off and did a lot of damage inside of our dyno room. He said that's when we knew we had something good going here. If we could just keep all that stuff connected, we were going to go on a tear, and they absolutely did. Think about all that it achieved, all the victories, all the championships. Robbie Gordon, another one who his career just shot to the moon as a result of being in Roush Mustangs. We're going to honor Jack here in just a moment, so why don't we quickly say thank you to Mr. Roush and the entire team that made this Mustang possible for all that it did to dominate GTO, scare away so many manufacturers. You know you're doing something right when no one wants to go up against you. So, Roush Mustangs, welcome to the IMSA Hall of Fame. We know that those 10 consecutive Rolex 24 victories were massive. 12 manufacturer titles, 119 sports car wins. He's already in the NASCAR Hall of Fame, Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. Started off as drag racer, then tried road racing, dominated that, said, well, let's go try NASCAR. Did that as well there. Everything he seemed to touch, this brilliant mind of his, resulted in success. And we talk about a kid coming out of karts from Northern California, got his debut in IMSA in Mazda RX-7s, but then Scott Pruitt, the name Pruitt, victory, and Mustang, those were synonymous. Tell us about Mr. Roush and what he meant to you in your career, and now as we look writ large, everything that he's done for IMSA.
Well, I'm, one, proud to be here. On behalf of Jack and the family, and thank IMSA for all the recognition and all the great years. And for me, it was a huge moment. Mazda was that first sort of step into the water, and with all that success I had in a very short period of time, Ford and Jack immediately took a look at me. Had my first opportunity to drive Ford Mustang 85 with Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner, different story. And we went on to finish second in that race, and then signed on to run with Jack. And Jack, as we all know Jack, he's a pit bull, he's tenacious. The reason that he got what he got and achievements is he's so incredibly hardworking. I had the opportunity to actually live with Jack in '86, '7, and '8 when I ran for them. We won 4 championships, and I'd go into the shop every day, and I'd be in that dyno room. And yes, that did happen. It was impressive the amount of torque that little 4-cylinder engine created, and it was the focus of Jack. And I think whether he did that in IMSA, whether he did that in NASCAR, whether he did that in Trans Am, you look at somebody that was committed and would take every advantage. We didn't really break the rules, but we would push that gray area as far as
Jack
we could.
knew the rule book very well.
Yes, he did. He would read that. That's what one of the first things he would do before every season. And he would look into every little nook and cranny of how we could take advantage of everything that we could. Between that and just incredibly talented drivers with the Ford Mustang, and more just with Jack's tenacity. I think that's the word for me. His love of racing, his tenacity for doing whatever it took to get to victory lane without really much concern for the politics of it. It's more just the focus of what do we need to do to get this done and get to victory lane.
Always appreciated about Jack that he was strictly about the racing, represented the Ford Motor Company, took them to the mountaintop. He was all about the racing, though. Greg Pickett, one of his drivers, told me a wonderful story of meeting him for the first time, commissioned car, motor, wanted to level up. Heard that this Jack Roush guy, 1970s, was the one to talk to, called him, said, yep, come on out. Greg flew out, got into Detroit. It was frigid snow early in the year, standing outside, kind of freezing, waiting to see something roll up, thinking it's going to be a nice, expensive vehicle. Says he sees this windowless box van come rolling up right in front of him. The side door gets slung open, said, come on in. Here's Jack, very successful at this point, not in some opulent vehicle, making no attempts to impress him with what he owns and put on a show. It's him and a couple of mechanics. Greg said he didn't actually have a seat to sit on, so he just sat in the back of this panel van and rode out to the shop. And he said it was an immediate declaration. This guy's here for the motor racing. Forget everything else. Gotta love a person with that kind of pure approach. There's one other famous Jack story to tell as well before we move along. All the drivers we mentioned, Tom Gloy, Willie T. Ribbs, Pickett, Max Jones, Chris Neifel, John Jones, Wally Dallenbach Jr., so many came out of this Roush factory. Pre-Rolex 24 meetings, driver meetings, he would do one thing. He would hand $100 bills to each of his drivers and ask them to tuck that into a pocket, something, in case they had a problem on track. Car was in a position where maybe the tow truck driver wasn't feeling particularly motivated to get it back to the garage, back to pit lane. Well, wonder if this would change your opinion. So just thinking through every possible thing, brilliant engine builder, manager, creator, manufacturer, Jack Roush, we're so indebted to you and everything you've brought to IMSA. Welcome to the Hall of Fame. I made the mistake of referring to this chassis, this car, as the Toyota Eagle Mark III one time, Mr. Wilson. I know it was a mistake because my hero and late friend Dan Gurney, who is about 6'4", but I swear he was about 10 feet tall, looked down and said, what? And I'm like, Toyota Eagle Mark III, I can't believe I got that wrong. He said, All-American Racers made that car. It had a Toyota engine without a doubt, and there was nothing negative or critical he was saying about the brand, but he was so fiercely proud of All-American Racers based in Santa Ana, California. This car designed by the great John Ward, aerodynamics by Hiro Fujimori. He wanted to make sure that when I referred to it in print or up here or anywhere else in the rest of my life, this was about 15 years ago, that I made sure that All-American Racers was said first. This vehicle killed the IMSA GTP class. on the topic of why even bother showing up anymore. This is what the Eagle Mark III did. A strange-looking vehicle if you compared it to everything else that was on track at the time. Low frontal area, everything tightly waisted. And here comes this car with as wide a nose as possible, seemingly as tall a nose as possible. I thought you were supposed to cheat the wind, make this aerodynamically pure, and seemingly they forgot that. But indeed they didn't. John Ward told me a story recently about the Mark III, where around 1980, 1981, Dan Gurney said to John, hey, you want to hop in the car and go to Laguna Seca with me? There's a Can-Am race. A couple cars I want to go see. John, who was young, just early into his design career, said, sure, what are you going to do? Say no to Dan Gurney? Make that 6-hour drive north, watch the Can-Am race, and there was a particular car, a Frisbee, driven by the Furcells. And John Ward said, I noticed something different about it. All the other Can-Am cars had bodywork that ran all the way along the sides, all the way up to just the back of the front tires, fully enclosed. And there's this one Can-Am car that didn't do that. Behind the wheels, it's about a 45-degree angle. There's a lot of space behind it. He said, looks like they're trying to let the air that comes into the front get out behind the tires and move smoothly around the car to the back. He was designing open-wheel cars for Dan Gurney at that point, had no reason to think about that for anything in sports cars until Dan called him about a decade later and said, need to do a new car for IMSA, new GTP car. He happened to think of that crazy trip to Laguna Seca about that Frisbee chassis, and what did they do? Came up with a through-flow aerodynamic design. So while the front of the car was wide and tall and seemingly everything you wouldn't want to present to the air, they came up with something that really had not been done to this manner in GTP before, and he indeed opened up a channeling behind those front tires, allowed massive amounts of air to come through, and solved the one problem that a lot of GTP cars had, which is not enough front downforce. Had a car here that made tons of front downforce. Drino Miller in this nuclear-powered Toyota motor that he created that was incredibly reliable, armed with Juan Manuel Fangio II, P.J. Jones, Mark Dismore, Andy Wallace, and others, showed up at Laguna Seca in 1991, middle of the season, happened to be there. I about fell over when I saw the car because it looked like nothing else. Put it on pole immediately, and it also made a great statement because every other car in the class became redundant in an instant. Led that first race, had some issues, didn't end up taking victory in its first race. It entered 27 IMSA races from the middle of 1991 through the end of 1993, 21 victories from 27 races. Mr. Wilson, tell us about pure ownership of IMSA GTP in its final original era. We thankfully have the GTP name back and amazing cars, and if I'm lobbying you to bring Toyota into the modern GTP hybrid era, I might be doing a little bit of salesmanship here, but tell me about the car that truly defined the end of GTP and frankly ended GTP.
I'd love to, Marshall, and I'm humbled to represent Toyota. I was just a soldier, a young engineer back in those days, but I had the great fortune and intimidating opportunity to be the engine engineer and supported Dan and All American Racers for from about 1989 through 1993, and I was going to, before you said GTP, I was actually going to thank Jim, Ed, John for bringing that brand back.
Amen.
Because that era is just so special. And my next comment is, I still think part of the agenda is to get Toyota back into a GTP.
You're not leaving this room, Dave, till we get your signature on that paper.
Yes. So, one of my favorite expressions in motorsports, and I don't know if it came from motorsports, but it's that the sweet is never as sweet without the sour. And while you led with the record at the end of that era, and the end of Toyota's GTP era, there was a lot of sour that went beforehand, and we had to survive the Mark II. You reference our little 2.1 liter 4-cylinder engine, which, by the way, we blew up a dyno as well, making massive amounts of torque. But arguably, that little engine was the Achilles heel for a couple of years. And I'll tell you one of my favorite stories, little inside baseball. But, Dan Gurney was the vehicle by which really Toyota entered North American motorsports in the mid-'80s. Started with GTU, started with GTO, and eventually GTP. Well, Dan always fashioned himself an engine guy. And he loved engines. And through the GTU, GTO period, he built the engines as well. They were badged Toyotas, but actually Toyota and TRD had little to do with those race cars. So when we graduated up to GTP, and after having some success racing against those Mustangs at the GTO level, Toyota decided that we needed to get our hands dirty. And that culture still exists today. And the decision was made, Mr. Gurney, we'd like TRD to build those engines and take care of those engines. That was like my first day on the job. And
Has your hearing recovered from being yelled at?
For 2 years. I mean, Dan would park me and my brother was an engine builder and a mechanic, and he and I were engineer mechanic supporting the team. We had like the back of the hauler. We had this little space, and Dan, he was not friendly. It used to piss me off because he was so damn charming, right, and witty, but it took a couple of years for me and my brother to get into his good graces, and we survived that era because we had an engine that was underpowered. It was unreliable, and it was uncontrollable.
It was also ugly too, but that's okay. The HF89 wasn't a looker.
But we fixed that, and what came with that was a level of credibility and respect. I don't know of many other GTP cars in that era that were running a 4-cylinder engine. But for me, perhaps the apex was winning the Rolex 24 in 1993 with that 2.1 liter engine. Rocky Moran, yes, rest in peace. Mark Dismore, and of course P.J. Jones. That same year, we went on to win the 12 Hours of Sebring. And here's another little inside baseball story, but the Toyota folks got together and said, listen, this car, and again, working in concert with Dan and All American Racers, we've got to take this car to Le Mans. I mean, let's do the triple in '93. Well, our colleagues in Japan, if you remember at the time, were racing in the prototype, the European prototype era. The
WSPC.
Yep, that's right, formerly Group C, and they put the block on it. And I often reflect back because, if you're a student of Toyota's prototype history, it took Toyota 25 years to win Le Mans. I still believe that was an unsolved opportunity for us in not taking that car to Le Mans.
I have dreams of a match race between the Eagle Mark III and the Peugeot 905 Evo because that was the only achievement this vehicle did not reach. As well, knowing by the end of its life in 1993, IMSA was doing everything it could to control this beast to make other manufacturers hopefully want to stay or come in. And why don't we say farewell with one of the great quotes, and we'll have to clean this up, of all time, courtesy of Mr. Gurney. I don't mean to pull the pin on the hand grenade here, Mark, but you and your team decided it needed a heck of an air restrictor, sipping air through an orifice about that size. Again, we'll clean this up, but what did Mr. Gurney say about that, Mark?
So this is one of the original BOP all-time great lines. The restrictor was like sucking air through a hummingbird's asshole. Pardon the language.
Or we don't clean it up. That's Mark Raffoff.
That was Dan
Love
Gurney,
him.
right?
Oh, understood.
Actually, I'm glad you didn't go in '93 because I won Le Mans in '93 in Belgium.
There you go.
I don't think I would have won if you'd gone.
Who said Toyota isn't a giving organization?
Actually, just really quickly, just a story about Dan and Toyota. I was standing on the pit wall at the start of the GTO race at Miami, and I think it was Steve Millen, but I'm not quite 100% sure. He was like on the third row. They went into the first corner. He went down the inside, took the front row out. They all piled in. Everybody crashed into the first corner. And Dan just looked at me and says, he'd better be hurt.
The Big Eagle. I believe I'm correct in saying, Bill, the first ever IMSA race, little Formula V, won with one of Mr. Riley's designs. We think of Ford going to Le Mans, victories there, his involvement through CarCraft. Front engine Mustang GTP, I recently got to see it at WeatherTech Raceway, Laguna Seca at the Rolex Motorsport reunion. Delightful. From the amazing all-conquering vehicles to some of the oddities. Charlie Kemp's Mustang 2 is a weird-looking thing. Wasn't his fault. The Mustang 2 was, they should have just stuck with the Mustang 1, but nonetheless, that car was phenomenal. The Roush Mustangs we spoke on. If you've ever seen or heard John Greenwood's Corvettes, we have Mr. Riley to thank for that. Famous 20-inch chassis design, Grand Am, as that came into view. The Riley 20-inch chassis is something where the RX-8 GT classes were absolutely wicked, won everything possible, but you could also put a BMW motor in that 20-inch design and put that bodywork on the car and other models as well. Dodge Vipers here recently, championship-winning effort, all coming out of Riley's amazing mind. The Grand Am Daytona prototypes, believe the most successful of all DPs, yet again. Mr. Riley, recently with LMP2 in partnership with Multimatic, thinking about there was a LMP2 design as well, Bill. I think you and your dad showed me in Utah, like 2008 or so. It was gorgeous. I still want to see that thing built. His Riley and Scott organization was a powerhouse in the Midwest. Also, so much success with GTP in the Intrepid, made so much downforce in its first ever test. How did they know how much downforce it made? Bill told me in a recent article in Road and Track, at their very first track test, got a message from the driver, hey, some sort of problem with a wheel? I don't know what, but I'm stopped on track. Could you come get me? Got there. No, there were no problems with the wheels. It made so much downforce, it exploded the sidewalls out of the tires. Goodyear had to rethink what they were doing. That Intrepid, part of the mythic 10,000 pound of downforce GTP era. Also, world sports car design, iconic as well. Winner with that beautiful car. Just saw that last weekend driven by Colin Brown at Sonoma Raceway at the Velocity Invitational event. So much success with Wayne Taylor and that team in 96. Believe that car was among the first designed using computational fluid dynamics. 1996. And yet, Mr. Riley, still an avid lover of a pen and paper, not surrendering fully to computer-based tools. Everything this gentleman has done has touched our lives in sports car racing and open wheel in North America. very few people I can think of. In Formula One, we think of Adrian Newey, possibly as among the greatest all-time designers. We have Mr. Riley. Thank you so much for everything you've done for us, sir, to make our sport what it is. Tell me about this journey you've been on that has dominated your life, your son. This is a family business that continues today, but tell us about what this long arc of IMSA has meant to you.
Well, it's been great, but first I must say it's such an honor for me to be inducted into the IMSA Hall of Fame. I appreciate that a lot. That means a lot to me. So thank you very much. Now, I don't know if I could add anything you said.
I just had to love on you. I mean, but your designs, though, sir, from the smallest open wheel cars where careers could get started all the way up to the peak. Seems like doesn't matter what it is, you've had love designing, and those creative thoughts, they have never stopped flowing.
Now runs race teams and also runs a company. I still do an occasional design. Not well, but I do it anyway. But anyway, thank you very much, Marshall. That was very nice.
As a former mechanic, engineer, we love our drivers. We love our team owners. We love the folks who make the races possible from an administrative standpoint. But you also need to stand back and look at that grid, record grid, John, at Motul Petit Le Mans. So much vibrance going on today in IMSA. You then just take a few steps back and you realize that you look at those grids here at Petit Le Mans and so many other events for the past 50 plus years in cars that he conceived, made at his shop with the help of his son Bill as well. So much of IMSA history came from Bob Riley's mind. We are so thankful for him.
You know, I think I may have been at IMSA's first race at Daytona with a Super V. I remember going through registration. There was a gentleman there and his wife. And then we went on to, I said, well, where's Tech? And then this relatively heavy-set guy came by and said, well, we take your car here. So he went around it right while it was sitting in the garage. I thought, whoa, I've been running SCCA for quite a while. What a nice relief. And now to think that it's gone from that to this. Yesterday, I mean, the crowd was fantastic. You guys are always thinking of the next step, what to do next. And I think that's been a big key in keeping IMSA growing and growing and growing. And I know it's going to grow more. It's going to grow more. So congratulations to IMSA for doing this. I think also one reason sports car racing is getting bigger is, let's face it, a good handling car that's fast is just fun to drive. So especially now, they're safer, they're relatively cheaper. See, they're safer if you don't do something dumb, that is. And the computer won't let you abuse the engine or transmission too much. So if somebody gets in one of these cars and a lot of small tracks popping up around, it just shows it's getting to be more and more of a hobby. Some guy gets in one, he says, well, I may be good at this. So he wants to try something a little bit more. I, on the other hand, I was only missing one thing. I was just short a little talent.
Welcome to my world, Mr. Riley. Friends, please welcome living legend, Bob Riley, into the IMSA Hall of Fame. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. We have the WeatherTech Night of Champions coming up here. Cocktails begin at 4. Program starts at 5. One last time, please say thank you to everybody from IMSA and NASCAR who conceived this, has made this Hall of Fame now in its second class. Can't wait to get going on who we're going to induct for year 3, Mark and John and everybody, and Mr. France. Thank you all for coming out. Please, one more round of applause for the folks who've helped make IMSA what it is.